Useless Monster by Mute Crows. Chapter 9, or Chapter 8. Aizawa near blinked in surprise at the calm greeting. Not many civilians or aspiring heroes knew his name on sight. He worked hard to stay as underground could get. Yet, based on the lack of reaction to losing his quirk, this kid not only anticipated who he was, but also his probability of using his quirk in response to his own. He stalked towards Midoriya, keeping a hand on his scarf to show he will use it if the kid tries to push anything. Your passage into this class was a break from logic. Your quirk may be useful to others in the short term, but it leaves you as a severe liability. What do you expect to happen when you cripple yourself in the field? You think someone is going to rescue you? His frustration with the school exam systems flared in the back of his mind. Rescue school or not, take down a 0-pointer behemoth or not, this kid was gonna flunk with his abilities. No, I don't. The response was a quick whisper, but one that genuinely stumped him for all of 1 second. It was resolute, confident. He pulled the boy closer with his capture weapon, noting the way his entire body tensed up as if expecting more than a redirect. Then you plan to cut your own career short that fast? That kind of planning is not something I will tolerate. There may be another hero who has made a name with his wanton courage, but I will not nurture such recklessness. The brute strength you have may reflect his, but unlike him, your power will get you nowhere, Midoriya Izuku. He sighed, closing his eyes and retrieving his scarf as he did so. Students mumbled in their crowd behind him. Good, maybe they'll start taking his comments more seriously than they would take the words of just an insensitive teacher. He grabbed a second ball and tossed it to him, taking note of how fluidly it was caught even without watching the ball. Good reflexes can be built upon if he doesn't show to have no room to adapt. Go again. We don't have time to waste. He pulled his eye drops out, listening to the mutterings of someone who would have to settle to their fate or force it. The students overall were still debating what Midoriya's next step could or should be. Another good thing, it was easier to have a class that started analytical than to have to drill the base instinct into them. The one boy, though, Magago Gutsuki, seemed to hold a special strength of vitriol for Midoriya, something that may have previously been acted upon if the way the kid flinched from the explosions was anything to go by. He pocketed the drops and cleared the last score on Midoriya's listings, opening the spot for a replacement. School records show that they have gone to the same schools since the beginning. Maybe it was just old news that was never dropped. You would have to get them past that. The muttering stopped, and Aizawa put his hands in his pockets. Looks like the kid is gonna force his fate. Unsurprising. The kid seemed to not hold himself to reasonable standards at all so far. He debated where he had put his paper for expulsion, only to have his thoughts cut short as the slightest smile broke Midoriya's face. With a blast of force kicking up dirt in a burst around him, the ball was sent flying at a low but long trajectory. It honestly sparked up a dash of excitement in Aizawa. Smart students gave him a solid challenge as a homeroom teacher. Midoriya stood up and flexed his hand, bringing attention to his nearly black broken finger that he didn't even blink at. He turned to him with a defiant look. No one needs to rescue me, Sensei. He couldn't help the grin that spread on his face. That's the drive and adaptability it was searching for. When faced with two unfavorable turnouts, heroes need to figure out if they can carve out a third one that leads to the best outcome. Maybe the kid wasn't a lost cause, just a misguided one. Some of the class cheered in the rowdy way young teens do when they think some statement has been made. Aizawa let out a huff as he looked at the score on his phone, putting Midoriya's pitch near the top of the class. They only had so much time to finish the tests, so he called out the next name to pitch. They would have all year to talk about each other. It could wait. Before the student could even break from the crowd, the Bagago kid launched himself forward. Jaku! He whipped his scarf to snare the boy, eyes flaring in irritation as he activated his quirk again. Today was not the day for excessive use. He had a long patrol the night before already. Bagago spit acid frustration as he struggled against the cloth. Midoriya hadn't moved at all, even with Bagago practically in his face. He simply had watched with a dangerously blank expression, stance blind and body relaxed in a way that spoke expectation and experience with the attack. A problem. One he would have to keep a sharp eye on. I will not allow infighting like this in my class. And stop making me use my quirk. I have dry eye. He released Bakugo and saw how Midoriya glanced at him at the mention of his dry eyes. As I said, a waste of time. Ojiro, go. Midoriya walked over towards Uraraka and Ida, who met him with a level of flair he didn't look to know what to do with. Thankfully, the rest of the tests went smoothly, although he could feel the low-set tension in the class. They collectively watched both Bakugo and Midoriya, perhaps waiting for another burst of action. When the class was collected around him, he displayed the results. All in all, it truly wasn't that bad for a base number in the class average. It wasn't the best class start he has had, but one should never base expectations off of minimal information. A solid but small foundation can still be made into a sturdy and tall building. He watched as a majority of the class turned their attention towards the student who placed last, Shinso Hitoshi. With a quirk that centered around the mind, Aizawa wasn't too disappointed in the results. Kids don't often have the foresight to build their skills in a rounded way, focusing on their strengths instead of lessening their weaknesses. No one has stood out to have zero potential for growth. Yet. So we turned off the projection and started towards the doors that would be fastest to return to the locker rooms they had changed in initially. No one is going to be expelled. Get back to class and wait for your next teacher. He stopped by the door and held it open with a foot as the class went by, all in various states of excitement and incredulousness. As Midoriya approached, he watched the almost cautious way he stepped around him. Midoriya. He pulled out a slip of paper from his pocket, offering it to him. Go to recovery, girl, and get that finger fixed. Oh, okay. He looked at his hand, flexing his fingers more without a blink. It was mildly disconcerting how little he seemed to be bothered by it. Then again, Aizawa had no way of knowing if his quirk came with increased pain tolerance or not, so he brushed it off. Once the last kid had entered the building, he let the door close and headed back across the field. It was the fastest way to the offices, only to be interrupted by the one staff member he would have much rather avoided until the crap of his arrival settled. All Might's massive frame was hunched around the corner still, as if it kept him at all hidden. He was honestly astounded none of 1A had noticed him. They surely would have gotten a kick out of discovering the hero's employment at their school. He walked straight past him without acknowledging him. Aizawa-kun! All Might quickly bounced up to his full height. He barely held in the exhausted groan and stopped walking. You lie so quickly to your students. You have no inhibitions to expel those you teach if you don't think they'll make it. So why the lie? He turned and leveled All Might with a flat look. You answered your own question. I didn't expel anyone because no one was below the mark. Not to say some didn't come close, but adaptability is a strong skill to have. All Might fidgeted subtly. The fact that the world's #1 hero was such a confident image in crowds but so awkward one-on-one would never cease to amaze him. You are talking about the one you lectured, young Midoriya. His question sounded earnest to a point of personal investment. Interesting. He shrugged as he turned to continue walking to the teacher's lounge. He had his sleeping bag waiting for him. Favoritism doesn't suit you when teaching, All Might-san. As I said, his potential wasn't zero. He didn't wait for a response. The older hero didn't have the position to question his methods. He has turned out plenty of fine students already, and prevented the harm of ones that couldn't make the cut long enough to warrant confidence in his own abilities. Recovery Girl was giving him a thoughtful look as he sat on the cot in the nurse's office. No comment was made, though, as she kissed his finger and it fixed itself faster than his own quirk ever did. It was a relief to not have the screaming pain of a shattered finger ripping through his nerves, even if it was only distantly registered. A somewhat interesting thing to feel was the clouded pain responses as he flexed the hand. Now that it was healed, though, he was reminded of how little sleep he had been getting. He did his best not to let it show. It wasn't even first block yet, and he was about to start blanking out on his feet. So, your quirk heals you, correct? She walked over to her desk and pulled out his file from a drawer. Yes, ma'am. It's not instant, but broken bones do heal in roughly a week, for example. A fact that depended on the severity of the break, but the average was about a week. The ready supplying of information got Recovery Girl's attention out of his file.
Did you learn that from how it breaks you like this?
What? She huffed as she closed the file and set it on the desk.
Your quirk is breaking your body, but there is no record of that happening previously. It would have shown in quirk assessments if it was a normal thing.
She walked over and pulled up her stool.
So why isn't it there?
The bone breaking from my quirk is new. I fell out of a tree as a kid. That's why I know the bone thing. It wasn't a lie, to be fair. It just wasn't a complete truth. He had no idea how much about his quirk to share, since no one even bothered to look into his quirk beyond district requirements before. That, and he didn't know how much about One for All he was safe to share. Yagi had said a very select few of his circle knew it, and as far as he could figure, that circle had to be pretty sizable. He is All Might for a living, after all. She gave him a suspicious look, humming softly to herself in consideration before she gave him a few candies and waved him off.
Don't be late. It is your first day of school, and you don't want to miss out.
The rest of the day, comparably, was mundane. It was interesting to see teachers' lecture styles, and some had small pains he took as steadily as he could, which meant slowly and bit by bit. He was getting better at the subtle use, but only on the very small aches. Lunch he ended up skipping, instead staying in the classroom, even though he really wanted to look for the teacher's lounge. Yagi would most likely be there, and he was mildly concerned about the way that when he focused on his range to try and find him specifically, there was a definite amount of pain that came from what was usually just him getting worked up. School life must be strange for someone who could sail across the sky at will with a single bound. None of the other students stayed in the classroom, off to explore campus as best as they could, so he ended up using the time to attempt resting some. It wasn't very successful, as he jerked to full alert with every sudden sound. If he was hyper-aware of his surroundings before being accepted into UA, was shared at Orudera, then he was on a completely unknown level now. He tried to keep his leg from bouncing too much, wrote down everything he could in each class, and dreaded the fact that he was sat directly behind Bakugo. It had him wired. Leaving the school grounds was a gift. At least he had been hoping it would be. The fast approach of a student was neatly dodged, the hand that would have landed on his shoulder swiping uselessly in the air where he once was. Ida looked stunned for a beat before moving on as if nothing happened.
I am glad to find you are healed,
he said. His straightforward tone and style of speech matched him pretty well. Throughout the day, Izuku noticed that the gestures and talk was just how Ida is, not some kind of passively aggressive action. People were strange. Yeah, Recovery Girl's quirk works fast, so it was fixed before first block. He started to walk again, Ida readily falling into place beside him. As to why he had picked him to walk with, he wasn't sure. Ida was monologuing about the day and the differences between UA and his old school when they were called down by a third person. His shout nearly made him jump slightly before he turned to look. Rebecca, his brain supplied. She had a lot of correct answers for the example questions in math that involved architecture. An unexpected specialty, but it was interesting to see her blow through the math.
Ah, Infinity Girl!
Ida greeted her, and Izuku gave him a thrown-off glance. He wasn't wrong, but it felt rather lacking in effort to just blurt so flatly. You would take some getting used to if Izuku planned on being able to read him properly. She seemed to be surprised, but unbothered by the nickname as well, smile never faltering.
That's me! My name is Uraraka, and you, she pointed at Ida, are Ida and Taku?
She tilted her head some as she said it. His heart seized in his chest. The name never carried friendly words with it, and he had been hoping it would stay behind at Orudera. It's Midoriya, actually. Bakugo started that to pick on me. His skin turned static at the memory not long past. He gave a shaky smile, not that new people would pick up as much. Hopefully the venom under his skin that Bakugo left behind would be gone sooner than later. It was paralyzing.
An insulting nickname at this age.
Ida pushed up his glasses swiftly and seemed to be flipping through thoughts. It has been a long-standing one. He adjusted his bag as he glanced around the emptying schoolyard.
I'm sorry. I didn't know. I thought thought it was playing off Takeru because of how you pushed past that, like, mini test Aizawa Sensei gave you in the middle of our tests this morning. Can-do attitudes are important in growing up. That's what my dad always told me.
She beamed at him and did some tiny cheer involving both the nickname and the word Takeru. Izuku couldn't help the stunned expression he got. Ida applauded the chant, which had Uraraka laughing as she bowed in an exaggerated way. A small laugh bubbled up in him as well. Okay, you can call me Deku then. He turned and continued out the gates, both of them falling in line with him. It was strange, but not uncomfortable.
Midoriya, didn't you just say it was an insult?
Ida made a crisply vague, prompting gesture.
You sure? I can call you Midoriya if you would prefer that.
No, it's okay. It's better when you say it like that. It takes the bite out of the name. They smiled and nodded at him respectfully as they took in his answer. The two seemed to be following his path as he went towards the nearest train station. They held up a full and steady conversation about the day on their own, and Izuku tried to focus on the things they said, but they weren't registering at all. So we just didn't talk. When they reached the station, Izuku stopped and realized he didn't actually have the funds at the moment to use the train to get across the district if he wanted to eat tonight. The two stopped as well.
Is everything okay, Midoriya?
Ida asked before pulling out his phone and checking the time.
The next train leaves in 10 minutes if we want to make this one.
This isn't the station I usually use. I was just following you guys.
Oh, I was just following you, Deku.
Uraraka touched 4 of her fingers together sheepishly. They all seemed lost as to what to do now for a few beats before Ida whipped a hand up, Izuku jerking back from it in what was probably a bit more than necessary.
We can outride the train to Midoriya Station and then we can say farewell.
Actually, yeah!
She cut him off excitedly before turning to him.
Then we can still hang out a bit before we have to go separate ways.
We have the same class. We will see each other tomorrow. He tried to recover his position. I'd rather walk to my station than spend the cash to just get on the train and use another train.
200 yen?
Ida sounded mildly confused at the reluctance of spending that kind of money. He did go to that high-class private school. He probably hasn't had to worry about his next meal in these terms. Izuku shrugged. He wasn't bitter about his hand in life. He wasn't the same as people on the whole, so how would he know if his lot was the standard for what he was or not? I'm trying to save up money. He hoped they would take that much. From the understanding look in Uraraka's eyes and rapid nods from Ida, they did.
Being conscientious of what you are spending is very astute of you, Midoriya. Highly respectable. I hope to see you bright and early tomorrow then.
A sharp bow and Ida turned to leave. Uraraka waved by as she followed him. Izuku waved back as they went into the station, getting lost in the after-school crowd. Izuku turned and went to the nearest cheap food place to pick up his dinner before his one-job shift tonight. After that, he had to get to a roof or some warehouse with minimal security or something. It was time for another change night, when he couldn't just choose not to do, and he was hoping to nap during it since he would be able to hear better around him. If he actually got any rest, maybe he could find Yagi tomorrow before class. If he got to UA early enough, that is. The school was nice, but also massive.